Moscow is on fire. A massive fire has broken out at the elite Rublyovka bathhouses. A 7,000 square meter complex is burning. Hundreds of people are being evacuated.
There's just open flames there. The fire safety system isn't working at all. At all.
The elite Malevich bathhouses are burning in the Moscow suburbs. Precise work by concerned citizens.
Just sparks and open flames.
And at the same time, a series of explosions is happening across Russia. Oil refineries are burning, the port of Novorossiysk, oil depots are detonating. Holy shit! Something else is exploding over there. Where is that?
That's in the empty lot back there.
S-400 radars and launchers have been destroyed. The port and ships are on fire. The Trans-Siberian Railway is paralyzed.
Damn, this is just awful. Go out, go out, go out, go out, go out.
Go. Ukrainian special services are carrying out precision strikes. Something else is exploding over there. Maybe it even got hit a second time. The Kremlin is trying to hide the scale of the failure. Let's break everything down step by step with the well-known journalist Olesha Bazban. Fuck's sake. Friends, on November 15th to 16th, as usual on weekends, Olesha Basman and I discussed the latest news. So the long Neptune missiles blew up Novorossiysk. Powerful strikes hit the oil terminals in the missile section. Shishkaris, actually a key export hub for Russia, is engulfed in flames. That's where the Kaliber missile depots were hit. Coastal facilities, a ship in the port, the detonation went on all night. And while Russia is busy putting out the fire in Novorossiysk, the disposal of mobilized soldiers continues at the front. A Russian blogger admits that just near Pokrovsk and Bakhmut, Russia has lost 100,000 people. And
for just these two small towns, Russia has already killed 80,000 to 100,000 of its own soldiers.
Some protests are starting among the war correspondents. Meanwhile, the US is opening a new front of pressure. The Ministers of Justice and the Ministers of War of Pethiks have launched Operation Southern Spear in Latin America. The target is the Maduro regime in Venezuela. The operation is already getting underway. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, there is a major corruption scandal in the energy sector, similar to Mindichgate. This could affect the support of our partners and Ukraine's prospects for joining the EU. We'll discuss all of this with the well-known journalist Olesha Passman. Olesha, I'm very glad to see you.
Dasha, I'm glad to see you too. Friends, I greet you all.
Yes, we meet every week and the news just keeps changing dramatically. How has this week been for you? Of course, let's start with the strikes. We're already seeing it in the port of Apps, the port of Novorossiysk, the port of Ust-Luga. Oil terminals are burning, but this is a very successful operation by the armed forces.
Western experts are absolutely right when they say that this winter will be both crucial and truly decisive for us, and it is absolutely essential for Ukraine to hold on and remain resilient. Because in war, when they strike at our energy infrastructure and we strike at theirs, it's very possible that the score will not be in their favor, but in ours, the advantage will be on our side. The thing is, look, Putin wasn't preparing for a long war. Putin originally planned to capture Ukraine in 3 days. Then, when it eventually became absolutely clear that the only thing he could possibly manage to capture in those 3 days was, in fact, yet another luxurious mansion for himself somewhere in Russia, he began to gradually shift his entire economy onto a full-scale war footing, and ultimately he did it. He succeeded in that, and now the economy is operating in this mode, but things haven't gone any further because he definitely doesn't expect the war to spill over onto his own territory, onto Russian soil. There was no preparation for this, and there still isn't. What does this mean? It means that Russia is absolutely unprepared for the possibility that they will have to fight not only where they came to seize territory, but that the fighting will have to happen at home on their own soil. And things will start flying at them at their own facilities, at their military sites. Look what has happened because of this. Because of this, there are no fortifications or air defense systems deployed around these sites. Putin doesn't have them. In other words, all the air defense that exists in Russia is, first and foremost, protecting private residences, mansions, and the places where Putin and his family are located. This includes President Putin's trusted inner circle, their private homes, their immediate families, and a few strategically important Russian military sites that are generally considered to be fairly well protected by advanced air defense systems. Among these sites is the Crimean Bridge, because Putin understands that if the Crimean Bridge falls, essentially his power will fall as well, since it has become a symbol of his rule, his expansionist power and policy. Everything else in Russia, Dasha, is basically left out in the open. That includes factories, warehouses, and so on. First of all, there are just so many of these things in Russia. Secondly, Russia is the largest country in the world by territory. It is extremely spread out, and it would cost a huge amount of money to try to cover all of that with air defense systems, a huge amount of money. And that money has long since been stolen in Russia and continues to be stolen. You see, to do this, you would need a completely different story and different finances. And right now, Putin doesn't even have enough to buy new cannon fodder for the front. So in this sense, of course, we have an advantage, a huge advantage, and we are going to use it. Yes, tonight is an extremely difficult night in Ukraine, an extremely difficult night in Kyiv, extremely difficult. And we don't know how many more nights like this await us. Because, of course, Putin has no intention of stopping. Of course, right now, as you and I discussed last time as well, I don't see any indications that, at least before the end of this year, Trump will take any drastic actions that would really influence or change the course of this war. That is, either he will introduce some new sanctions, pass the bills that are pending against Russia, or provide us with new superweapons in sufficient quantity. I don't see that happening yet. I don't know what will happen, because in that administration in the White House, everything is decided very spontaneously. And sometimes nothing seems to be happening today, but tomorrow Trump calls a press conference or just makes a post. And everything changes. But nevertheless, at the moment, there are no such discussions. Do you understand? That's why our task now is to keep fighting and to hold out. To hold out in this situation. Of course, in a situation where Ukrainian energy is under attack first and foremost, and winter is about to begin, we certainly hope it will be mild enough. This is very important for us. But we don't know what it will be like, because I checked the weather forecast. That is, the meteorologists are making cautious predictions, because we know that, because what they promise, well, very often doesn't come true, you know? So you just have to watch and prepare. But we understand that winter will be very difficult in any case. Some insiders are already suggesting that if things deteriorate significantly, part of the city of Kyiv will have to be evacuated. Where to? How? At whose expense? So these are all big, big questions. But what am I trying to say? You see, in this situation, especially in this situation, when this winter promises to be especially hard for us, but it is decisive in terms of the war, in terms of the outcome of the war. If we endure in the end, victory will be on our side. We are bringing peace closer on terms that are just for us, or not. So you see, in this situation, the task of maintaining internal stability, the stability of the system, and the resilience of the system, and not losing control over the governance of the country, becomes especially important. Let me explain what I mean. You see, against the backdrop of those corruption scandals you mentioned, and primarily the scandals in the energy sector, what matters? Well, of course, it's important that the criminals, those who profited from the war, in other words, corruption at the cost of blood, so that they receive the punishment they deserve. First of all, it's very important that we know about this, that these schemes have been exposed, that the system is working. And that's the most important thing that can be said about Ukraine today. That is, Ukraine is capable of self-purification. It's important, of course, that throughout all of this, we remain a state governed by the rule of law. It's important that all of this stands the test in court, that we see fair verdicts so that society, and not just society, it's important that this serves as a lesson for those who might now be entertaining thoughts about getting involved in corruption in any sphere, whether it's energy or anywhere else. Whoever is involved, whether it's the defense sector or any other level or sector, so that when they look at these high-profile, terrible, disgraceful cases, those thoughts simply die at the root. The idea that you can profit from your own country during wartime and, in essence, help the enemy, play on their side. This is a very important aspect, and I want to emphasize that again. This is precisely what will serve as a prerequisite to prevent this evil from spreading. But it is very important in this situation to make sure that all of this doesn't snowball, so that it doesn't go further without facts turning into indiscriminate accusations against everyone for what is happening. Why am I saying this? Because even now, when I look at some posts on social media, I see accusations being made, even against the president, for example. Right now, you see, it's important to speak based on facts and to approach everything with a cool head. As of today, we do not have a single fact, not a single confirmed fact, that the president was in any way involved in this corruption. On the contrary, we have facts that point in the opposite direction. First of all, the heads of NABU and SAP themselves say that he is facilitating the investigation, not just not hindering it, but actually facilitating it. We see actions that the authorities have taken various actions, for example, such as dismissing ministers and imposing sanctions, some of which were initiated by the president himself. Here, if the situation were different, you understand that the authorities would be trying to protect themselves and would behave completely differently. That is, they would resist, they would try to throw a wrench in the works, they would try to intimidate, they would try to do something to cover things up, to somehow interfere with the investigation. But everything is happening the opposite way, and thank God for that. So this is what I want to say. Right now, it is absolutely essential to strictly stay within the legal framework in order not to lose control over governance in Ukraine. Because Putin's main dream today is for chaos, confusion, and uncontrollable, unclear processes to start inside our country. Processes that only he would benefit from. After all, that's no secret. Not only insiders have talked about this, it's been reported in the media and it's mentioned in documents that were sent to the United States. And Putin has openly said that he would be satisfied with any president in Ukraine as long as it's not Zelensky. Because throughout this entire time, and for almost 4 years now of this large-scale, full-fledged war, Zelensky doesn't give up and doesn't let Putin seize Ukraine and do what he wants, to absorb it. That's why, in this sense, I understand very well that right now we're in a somewhat dangerous situation. On the one hand, we need to clean up. We need to remove both the authorities, the bureaucratic circles, and everyone involved in corruption, past and present. But on the other hand, we need to maintain internal stability. Because, I repeat, friends, we are entering a very difficult period. We've already entered it, but judging by how things are developing, it could get even more difficult. The situation in the energy sector.
Friends, please, right now, Olesha and I are discussing very important topics. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion is very valuable to Olesha and me. I always read the comments. Let us know where you're watching from, how things are with electricity where you are, and how you're feeling. Olesha and I are sending you all our best wishes, and also please share your perspective on this week's events as a whole. Olesha, of course, there's another very important topic that I can't help but discuss with you. It's the situation in Pokrovsk. The president was there, and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine was there too. And now I see Russian war correspondents reporting that Russia is throwing all its meat assaults at Pokrovsk. The main goal is to capture it. They're even setting deadlines, mid-December, and they're setting a deadline for Kupiansk as well. And Russian war correspondents have already written that just near Pokrovsk and Bakhmut, Russia has lost, disposed of, or to put it bluntly, killed 100,000 people, and all of them. In such, even rage, I watched how Russian bloggers are outraged by this situation, saying what will happen next. Do you see any turbulence among Russian army bloggers, the Toad and the Viper? Because I noticed that even Solovyov has started going after the Kadyrovites, and there are some conflicts there. Abdeluddin is involved in this. And then the so-called SVOshniki are trying to force Solovyov to go to the front. Some kind of Toad and Viper drama is developing around this topic, on this ground, so to speak.
Yes, that would be a good story if Solovyov finally went to the front. At least our guys would be happy. They'd have even more work to do. No, Dasha, I don't see any prospects yet that this will turn into some kind of explosion. It will just be this kind of sluggish story that will keep going. Basically, this has been developing among them for quite a while already, and from time to time they take little bites at each other. I mean, the official Kremlin propagandists and those so-called Z-war correspondents, it's more or less, they throw accusations at each other, but it never escalates into anything big, nothing that goes beyond certain boundaries. That is, it hasn't come to blows or even to any real threats against each other. They haven't done anything like that. Look, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the fact that Putin has less and less human resources to carry out the military objectives he's setting for them. And he needs to find these resources somewhere because they're not unlimited either. Does he theoretically have it at all? Of course he does. I mean, there are a lot of people there, but how do you get them? Because at first, you see, they came up with an interesting way by going into the prisons and clearing out all those places that could be cleared out. Then they went to the national republics, took people from there, and saw that people were starting to push back. Mothers began to take to the streets, so they stopped. And then they just started paying big money to buy these people who, well, it's hard to even call them people, but still, who they went to the front and sold their lives, their health, their legs, their arms, everything was fine. But their families agreed to this because for them it was a huge amount of money. On the contrary, many of them did it willingly. Their wives pushed them to do it. Their mothers pushed them to do it, saying, "Oh, at least he'll do something good for the family with his life. We'll buy a car later. Yeah, let him either get killed there or come back disabled." They don't care. So this is a certain category of people, and it turned out there are quite a lot of them in Russia, and they, in fact, went for it voluntarily. But even this group is starting to run out now. On the one hand, and on the other hand, the big resources that lured and bought them are also running out. That's why Putin has now moved to year-round conscription. This is the first step he took to somehow address the shortage of personnel. So what should he do next? I don't know, maybe they've come up with something else, but basically there are only two options left. Either keep buying people and endlessly raising the price to attract volunteers, because they've even launched a campaign now. Bring a friend and get a bonus. Basically, bring your friend to the meat grinder. And if you bring two friends, you get an even bigger bonus.
You'll get a meat bonus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, seriously, they've launched it. They're putting up flyers everywhere. They're trying to get creative with this bloody business, bloody bonuses, but still. Or the second option is to announce mobilization. Announce mobilization, completely close off the country, Russia, and accordingly start taking everyone indiscriminately and sending them to the front. But you understand, the recent public opinion polls that President Vladimir Putin has seen indicate that mobilization could actually lead to significant public unrest because the people might rebel. I'll be completely honest with you, I genuinely don't know exactly how to feel about this, because it honestly seems to me that nothing at all can make them rebel anymore. They're slaves, that's what they are. He kills them, he tortures them, he turns them into murderers, I would say. But you can't make someone a murderer. Well, that must mean that's how they are inside. It's not him. He's not the one sitting at the controls of the plane and bombing like today, sending missiles at residential Ukrainian buildings where there are pregnant women, children, hospitals, kindergartens. But it's not him. It's those freaks, you see, at the controls who do it. And on the front lines, it's the same kind of freaks who go and kill our guys. They're not going home. They're going into someone else's country. Why are you coming here? Who invited you here? What right do you have? What business is it of yours anyway? You see, that's why even when I try to put it into words, I do it very carefully, because you can't just say that he directly forced someone to do something. It's not just Putin who's bad and everyone else is good. No, they're all the same over there. That's how it turned out. So do I believe in a rebellion? No, anything is possible. Look, even a rebellion is possible if the situation comes together, like we discussed before, if the stars align, so to speak, when the desires of the lower ranks meet the willingness of those at the top. Because we understand that part of Putin's inner circle is, of course, not just dissatisfied with what's happening, they already hate him. They just can't say it. Well, they're afraid, they're scared for their lives because nobody wants to fall out of a window again or, shoot themselves. They're afraid for their fortunes. Just imagine, they've stolen billions upon billions. So what, now they're supposed to lose it also pointlessly? They're afraid for their families' positions, because most of them are already set up somewhere and working too. So basically, they're just afraid. Otherwise, they would have gotten rid of him a long time ago. So only if this whole situation comes together, when things have reached a boiling point, both at the bottom and at the top, when there's some kind of turning point, then maybe it could happen. It could, of course, it could. Moreover, even if it happens now, it's usually the closest circle that carries out any coups. They're completely tied to him. Their hands are just as blood-stained up to the elbows. They're involved in all these things. But history knows examples. I mean, that's how it usually happens. Then these very same close associates, the ones he thought he had bound to himself with blood, thinking they would never turn against him because they committed the crime together, they make one of them the scapegoat, put him on display, pin absolutely all the darkest deeds on him and say, oh, us. No, everything we did was because, well, his sister was practically being held hostage or this or that. He had no other choice. He himself is a victim, a casualty of the regime. You see? And then the cult of denouncing the individual begins all over again. Just like it was with Stalin when Khrushchev announced, although Khrushchev, well, who was Khrushchev? He was the one who, together with Stalin, signed practically all the execution lists, the death warrants, and everything else. It was all like that, a mutual cover-up. And then he simply sent his own man into the archives to clean up as much as possible, to remove whatever he could. And then he got up on the podium and said, no, that's it. We lived through all this. He's to blame. That ghoul, but us, we didn't know. We didn't want it. We couldn't do anything. So in this sense, you see, anything is possible. And history knows such examples, and it can happen this way. But right now, these are just the prerequisites for what we might discuss for the future. For now, as things are going the way they are, we don't see any signs of that. We understand that we simply need to prepare ourselves for a tough struggle and to get through this winter. Of course, you know what the thing is. If Ukraine, with the significant and ongoing help and support of our Western partners and allies, manages to carry out a series of very successful, well-coordinated and impactful strikes in turn, one after another, against Russia, and if these actions directly affect the daily lives, routines, and well-being of the people, the lives of everyone living inside the country, then yes, these processes could indeed accelerate there. And then, as a result, the spiral of events and consequences could start spinning and unfolding much faster than we might currently think or expect. Is that possible? Of course it's possible.
I can't not discuss Venezuela with you. Once again, the defense minister, or rather more accurately, the Minister of War, made a statement that they are starting an operation to overthrow Maduro's regime. What do you expect from this in the context of Ukraine, of course?
Trump, of course, is an irrepressible, truly and always restless person and president. He's a creator of newsworthy events every day. Not a day goes by without a headline. You know, I think the devil is not as scary as he's painted. And this whole story with Venezuela puffing up in response saying, we're mobilizing, we're the army, we're this, we're that. I think all of this will end quickly. It won't last long at all. After a few decisive actions by the US, everything will end quickly and a constructive dialogue will begin. And in the end, Trump will more or less get what he wanted. At the very least, let me put it this way. In terms of information, he'll be able to come out again and say, look, I won this war. So it doesn't matter when, how long it takes, or what happens next, whether things start up again, what flows, drug flows, where they'll go again. Look, his stated goal is actually a good one, right? No one here is arguing with that. Of course, we need to fight drug trafficking and all this horror. It's a problem that has lasted for decades at the highest level. It's worth trillions of dollars, if it can even be counted at all. But if you ask me whether drug trafficking as such will be eradicated after this, the result, well, you and I both know, and I think our viewers, as well as everyone watching at home, know the answer to that question too, to be honest.
So you see, everyone thought that if the Maduro regime changed, Venezuela, which is huge, the #1 in the world, in terms of oil reserves, would start joint trade with America. And as a result, production would increase, oil prices would fall, and that would be the end for Putin. You see, everyone expects this from a change in the Maduro regime, from its collapse.
Look, when it comes to the energy market, of course, the global situation is extremely important, which is influenced by and essentially created by just a few people in the world, that is, a handful of the most influential people on the planet. A lot depends on them because the decisions they make and the direction they steer things in shape the overall picture going forward. What will happen here? After Trump announced that he was starting a war, experts feared that oil prices would actually spike. But no, that didn't happen. In fact, today they've even dropped a little. So, of course, what story is important for us? The more oil there is on the world market that is not from Russia, and people start buying it and it becomes cheaper, the better for us and the worse for Russia. Because this is what feeds the Russian war and what gives it money. Dasha, well, in any case, we understand that there is such a prospect with Venezuela in terms of oil and the energy market, but this is not a quick situation. That is, unfortunately, this isn't something that's going to happen literally this month or that we expect in the next 2 weeks. No. This whole story, it's more or less still up in the air. While this happens, while that happens, it all depends on how things develop, how agreements are reached, whether there will be a change, what kind of change it will be, how they will enter the market, how the markets will react, who will start changing or not changing contracts. So in any case, we understand that this is the winter we're talking about, the one we have to get through. And just like we said at the beginning, basically Ukraine needs to hold out until the 1st of April. If Ukraine holds out, it will win the war. It's the same thing here. Before that time, well, it's unlikely that anything will actually start physically, you know? In the long run, yes.
Friends, despite the situation with energy, the economy, and the power outages, Olesha and I always come on every weekend to discuss for you the most relevant topics, always in a restrained professional manner. Olesha, I really appreciate that you always assess key events so delicately, so intelligently, and so professionally. Witty humor and erudition are, so to speak, the hallmark of our broadcasts. Yes, we have a female perspective. Friends, forgive us, but we are very glad that you are always with us. So friends, please like this video, write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments, and tell us how you are doing. Where are you? Do you have electricity? Olesha and I are sending you rays of kindness, light, and love, the one and only Alisa Basman. Ali, thank you so much. See you next weekend.